Again, my name is Thomas. Thanks for joining us today. Um, I'm an organizer with Food and Water Watch. I'm based in Seattle, Washington. And thank you again, and welcome to our webinar and the Transatlantic campaign to stop liquefied natural gas, LNG, and to move off gas. We have a great lineup of speakers today, both from different parts of the US and from Europe, hence the transatlantic connection. Um, and you'll hear from a bunch of great folks, and we'll cover a lot. Um, Here's a quick rundown of what we're going to cover today. You can see a quick agenda on the screen. I assume folks who are joining are aware of this, but obviously there's a big push for more LNG exports from the US and kind of corresponding imports on the European side of the Atlantic. And because of that, it's more important than ever that we are increasing our coordination and collaboration between friends and allies on both sides of the Atlantic to reject this LNG bonanza that the industry is pushing. We know that LNG is a disaster for our climate, it's bad for our health and for our communities, and will only make the world more insecure. Recent announcement from President Biden, hopefully folks heard, for a pause on new approvals of LNG exports is a huge positive step in the right direction. And it's really a result of many of the folks you'll hear from as speakers and a lot of you on the call listening in as well. We need to defend this important decision and expand on it. And so you'll hear more about the details of this from our speakers, some recent victories on the European side as well, and then some ways to take action and keep up the momentum. This is going to be the first in a series of forums we'll be organizing, again, as we work together to create more connection and collaboration between Europe and the US on our collective efforts to move off gas and stop LNG. So thank you again, everyone, from joining. And we've got a bunch more folks I see in the chat from both the US and Europe. So thank you all for joining. Okay, before we get to our first speaker, we have a quick video message from my friend and yours, Mr. Mark Ruffalo.
Hey everyone, thanks for inviting me to join the call about the off-gas transatlantic campaign. I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, it's so important right now to build on the momentum from our big wins in both the United States and Ireland to stop LNG expansion and get off gas everywhere. So the gas industry did everything they could to use the Russian invasion of Ukraine to expand gas infrastructure and export more fracked gas to Europe. But we kept amplifying the science and organizing people power to stop the industry in its tracks. Thanks to all your hard work, in September, the Irish government rejected a permit for a new commercial LNG import terminal. And last month, the Biden administration announced a halt to new LNG export approvals and is finally beginning to acknowledge LNG's catastrophic climate impacts, along with the economic costs and national security risks. So we're doing good. And while there's still so much work to be done, both here and in Ireland, to permanently stop LNG terminals, man, these are incredible steps for amidst a massive industry push, and are a testament to our movement's strength. We're doing okay. And we're strongest when we work together. European groups supported the US groups in demanding the Biden administration halt LNG exports. Now let's take this victory in the US and build on it with our allies across the pond in Europe. We know that any serious review of the climate impacts, the economic costs, and the security risks of LNG will find that they must be stopped. And with the power of our movement, people working together across the United States and Europe, we can truly turn the tide against LNG forever. When we fight, guys, we win. So let's build on the momentum. Let's stop LNG and create the clean energy future that we know is possible and that we all honestly deserve at this point. Thank you. You're the best.
No, you're the best, Mark. Great. Well, a great way to kick it off and a good summary of some recent highlights from Mark there. Um, okay, well, our first speaker that you'll hear from live is Roishetta Ozane. Roishetta is the founder of the Vessel Project of Louisiana, and she has been a real hero and a major leader in the fight to stop LNG exports from the U.S. In her home state of Louisiana and all along the Gulf Coast. So, Roishetta, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, just depending on where you are in the world. My name is Roishetta Ozane. I am the founder, director, and CEO of the Vessel Project of Louisiana. I'm also the Gulf Fossil Finance Coordinator for Texas Campaign for the Environment. In the words of the great Desmond Tutu, my humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. And that is how we will win this fight against these major fossil fuel extractive industries. We will win together. This recent pause announcement by the Biden administration pausing the approval of new proposed LNG export facilities was done in collaboration with many of you on this call. It took frontline leaders, it took policymakers, folks who are working on the Hill, people across the pond, everywhere, all over. It took all of us coming together with one demand, and that was to stop LNG. We had a narrative in mind, and we fought hard to make that come to fruition. Now, there has been a lot of misinformation around this pause. What the Biden administration did not do is they have not blocked the export of LNG to other countries. Existing LNG facilities in the U.S. are not affected by the decision, and the 8 existing LNG export terminals will continue to operate. The administration is also not stopping new LNG exports. None of the 10 new LNG export facilities that have already been approved by the Department of Energy are affected. In fact, LNG exports are expected to massively expand. What Biden has implemented is a temporary pause on granting Department of Energy approvals for new proposed LNG export facilities. This means that only facilities that fossil fuel companies have not obtained permits for are affected. This decision is significant from a climate perspective because it prevents the approval of 6 major proposed LNG export terminals, which would have resulted in carbon emissions equivalent to 37 coal plants. It's important to note that we don't know how long this pause will last, what the new approval process will entail, or how many of the affected projects will be accepted or rejected. There is a possibility that the process may continue even after this administration, whether they win this next election or not. However, this pause is a big step, so much so that it is under attack by House Republicans here in the U.S., who just passed H.R. 7176. This bill would eliminate the Biden administration's authority to halt new natural gas export projects, effectively removing the ability to reject them. The vote was a 224 to 200 vote. 9 Democrats voted in favor of this bill. The current chairman of FERC is Willie Phillips, and they want all power to be in the FERC's hand. We know from past experience that the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has not seen a permit that they do not like. You may ask why I'm mentioning all of this. Yes, We are celebrating this pause that the Biden administration administered, but we are still having to fight every day because that pause, even though it was a big step, it was only a small part of our fight for environmental justice. Our fight still continues. We still need all of you. We need to work together in solidarity to ensure that we stop LNG finally. That none of these projects are approved, and that the projects that are currently operating in our communities are shut down, and these polluters are made to pay and to clean up their mess they've already made. Thank you all so much for having me today. I look forward to answering any further questions that you may have. And thank you all for taking time out of your day to be a part of this webinar. It takes all of us. You may feel like you can't help or that you don't play a part, but you are just as important. Share our stories, share our social media posts, write to your senators and your congressmen and let them know what is happening in communities all along the Gulf Coast. We are no longer sacrifices, and we will continue to speak up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roishetta. And very well said. We have a few key action items for everyone at the end of the call. And like Roishetta said, we're going to take some questions at the end as well, which reminds me, we turned off the chat just to kind of minimize distractions. And I think everyone has introduced themselves, hopefully. If you do have a question, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Put that in there, and we're going to get to as many of those as we can towards the end of the call. Great. Thank you again, Roishetta. And we'll hear more about what's happening in the US and in the Gulf Coast shortly. But we're going to go over to Europe and hear from my colleague Frida with Food and Water Action Europe. Frida, take it away.
Yes, hello, good evening for Europeans and good morning for folks in the US. Yeah, I'm trying to bring in a bit the pan-European perspective on LNG. As many of you know, the US became the #1 supplier of fossil gas in the form of LNG to Europe in the recent months. And that clearly shows that there is a strong transatlantic fossil fuel connection, which makes clear that we have to, yeah, we're in this together on both sides of the Atlantic and on both sides of the supply chain. And yeah, those of us who care about climate, health, and justice, we clearly must join forces and work together to stop this reckless LNG trade along the lines of what Mark Ruffalo and also Roishetta before me have already said. What might be a bit less known is the fact that here in Europe, there's been quite a big boom on infrastructure build out for LNG import since the invasion of the Ukraine in 2022. LNG terminals have basically mushroomed all across the European Union. Given that the floating storage and regasification units, FSRUs, are faster to set up, we saw particularly many of those starting to import LNG in the last months since the invasion. Yeah, there have been import facilities that have been set up new in the Netherlands, in Italy, in Finland, and France, and most importantly in Germany, which has seen already 3 new import facilities just since in the last 2 years, and basically is the epicenter of this LNG boost. But Andy will tell us more about Germany later, I believe. And on top of that, similar to the US, there's many more LNG import facility build-out plans in the pipeline still. And that clearly goes against any economic and also climate logic. In 2023, we saw the average utilization rate of the import facilities that we had was under 60%. So 40% of those capacities have been laying idle, and gas storage was at a record high all across Europe. And at the same time, the EU gas demand has gone down considerably by 19% in the past months. And if we look at commitments such as the climate law, but also Repower EU, gas demand must fall by much more and over 50% until 2030. So there is a big mismatch with the build-out plans and the actual demand and demand projections. We see also, like in the United States, many groups in Europe, local and on national level, that are fighting against this creation of stranded assets. And they focus on environmental destruction of the LNG facility build out, but also against this fossil fuel lock-in that terminals represent, and also pipeline infrastructure to then transport the LNG into Europe. And having this transatlantic LNG connection has really been crucial in the fight and has really strengthened us in the past and will continue doing so in the future. That's clear for me. In January, for example, civil society groups in Europe sent a clear message to the Biden administration saying that they don't want to be used as an excuse to, that Europe shouldn't be an excuse to build out further facilities in the United States. The same has been done by decision makers from national and EU Parliament. And Biden's national climate advisor, Adi Zaidi, has even talked publicly about these letters after discussing the Biden announcement on the LNG pause. So it really shows that it's critical that we do have transatlantic visible cooperation and fighting both imports and exports of LNG. Also, on our side, it really strengthened the fights that the groups have here against the LNG infrastructure build out to learn from people in the United States that are suffering from the build out. We invited, for example, a few folks from the US in our cross-European campaigner meeting, and this has really been eye-opening for many, and connections have been built that are a base for further collaboration. And in any case, what we see in Europe is that we are in a very hypocritical situation because many of the biggest importing countries of LNG actually have fracking bans, fracking moratoria, or fracking limitations on their own territory, but no problems to import fracked gas from the United States. So this is something that we are building on as well and showing this hypocrisy. And US LNG is clearly an important topic here, with US being the #1 supplier, and also the Biden administration causing quite a lot of further discussion on LNG. As we heard from Roishetta, there are definitely weaknesses to this pause as well, and it's not covering most of the expansion plans and so on. But definitely we see that it's a very powerful message that we need to stop the unchecked expansion on both sides of the Atlantic, and that there should be a European answer as well to this announcement. It also clearly lays bare that there is a lack of a trans-European look at actually energy security. The member states really pretty much acted in silos so far. So as the EU cannot oblige member states to act jointly on the topic of energy imports, there has been build-out plans basically continuing in many countries, not looking at what neighboring countries do, which is further contributing to a big build-out of overcapacities in Europe. On top of that, we also see that the LNG build-out is often made to look like a necessary step in the green transition, because much of the LNG infrastructure is being greenwashed with the argument of being useful for hydrogen in the future. And these claims largely lack any sense of reality, but yeah, this is a whole other story to tell. Basically, we definitely are making progress together, but there's really much more to do. I agree with my previous speakers on that. It is clear that only together and joining our forces across the Atlantic, we can strengthen each other's and stop LNG to protect our climate and communities. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Frida. It's a great rundown of what's going on in Europe and some recent highlights. And as Frida mentioned, we'll hear a little bit more about a couple specific examples shortly. Thank you again, Frida. And our next speaker is Dr. Sandra Steingraber. Sandra has been a leading voice for over a decade in working with scientists and health professionals in the fight against fracking and fossil fuels. And like our other speakers, just a really critical leader in the movement. So Dr. Steingraber, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Thomas, and hi, everyone. Well, I'm super honored to be with you today. Roishetta, I'm a big fan. I'm one of the lead signatories of the scientist letter to President Biden calling for an end to new fossil fuel projects, and also specifically new LNG projects. I'm a biologist, and I'm one of the co-founders of Concerned Health Professionals of New York. And our signature work is this giant document, the Compendium of Scientific, Medical, and Media Findings Demonstrating the Risks and Harms of Fracking, which is now out in its 9th edition. It's a public open access monograph that's available on our website, but when I want to find it, I just Google fracking compendium and it pops right up. This compendium has 637 pages and 17 chapters, and one of them focuses deeply on LNG facilities. Let me share with you some of the findings from our chapter and then tell you about the forthcoming Howarth study. We find that harm from LNG takes 4 forms: acute threats to public safety, long-term threats to public health, massive coastal habitat destruction, that coastal habitat protecting us from the storms of the climate crisis, and then climate destruction itself. And all of these problems arise from one simple fact: methane will only turn into a liquid if you make it super cold. And it only stays super cold with evaporative cooling, which means you have to constantly vent methane into the atmosphere. So LNG is created through cryogenics. Everything bad about it flows from this fact. LNG is a public safety menace because a spill turns into a rapidly expanding cloud that can flash freeze human flesh. And if that spill is ignited, it becomes a rapidly expanding flaming cloud that can burn human flesh up to a mile away. LNG poses public health threats because when the methane gas is chilled to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is about 180 degrees Celsius for everyone else in the world, any impurities in the gas will freeze up at that temperature. So those impurities, including cancer-causing benzene, have to be stripped from the methane and are simply released into the air by the LNG liquefaction plants, along with sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide. And this is how LNG is a source of toxic air pollution in the communities. LNG facilities destroy coastal habitat because they have to be huge. Whole new power plants have to be built just to provide the immense energy for super chilling that gas into a liquid. LNG destroys the climate because LNG tanks and ships are leaky by design to keep this LNG cold. So to maintain the liquid at this super cold temperature, vaporized methane is vented from storage tanks, often directly into the atmosphere. And once it reaches the other side of the ocean, before it is sent down a pipeline, LNG must be regasified, which requires even more energy and also periodic flaring to control pressure, another source of toxic air pollution, as well as climate emissions. So altogether then, refrigeration, venting, leaks, flaring, and shipping make LNG more energy intensive than natural gas sourced by fracking. Now, I want to emphasize here that we have 12 years of data showing that natural gas and LNG are terrible for the climate. So much attention has been paid to the new bombshell Howarth study, which I'm now going to tell you about, that it's easy to imagine that it somehow stands alone. So I just want to emphasize that it doesn't, that there's plenty of corroborating data that came before the Howarth study. It just doesn't get as much media attention. Okay, so here's a little bit about that new study. Dr. Robert Howarth of Cornell University here in New York conducted the first full life cycle assessment of the greenhouse gas emissions from LNG exported from the United States. And he started from the point where the drill goes into the ground to frack the gas out of it, all the way to the point where the gas is burned in some other country. And what he found was that the total greenhouse gas emissions from LNG are larger than those from domestically produced coal. And that largeness ranges from 27% greater to more than 2 times greater, depending on how far the LNG tanker is traveling and what kind of tanker it is. Older ships are leakier than newer ones, but even the new ships make LNG worse than coal. He found that the fugitive emissions of unburned methane are particularly important, but so are the carbon dioxide emissions from the energy-intensive process of fracking. And so are the emissions from regasifying the LNG once it reaches its destination. Now, there are already, before this paper has even been published, plenty of criticisms that are flying around. Some of them have to do with the assumptions built into estimating greenhouse gas emissions from, say, the ship's oil-burning engines. And some of these criticisms are in good faith, even though I don't necessarily agree with them. There are, scientists in good faith who are questioning the assumptions of his study, and that's what scientists do. But what I want to point out is that all of these arguments, whether they're with merit or without merit, are only focused on the present moment. And what's indisputable is that increasingly coal is continuing to decline around the world and renewables are increasing. Thus, as the years go by, LNG exports from the United States will be increasingly competing more and more with renewables and less with coal. And the years have to go by just to get an LNG plant from the proposal stage to an operational facility. LNG facilities are slow monsters, and nobody has time in a climate emergency to say yes to slow monsters. Now, I'm a scientist, and as such, I'm aware that all by itself, political leaders do not act on the findings of science. If they did, we would have solved the climate crisis decades ago. Instead, civil society must open up a space in the political culture and create such a political crisis that science gets to speak. So going forward, I'm committed to working in solidarity with all of you and organizing science to endorse the demands of the Stop LNG campaign. Science is on the side of this campaign, and we're the ones that can bring the data to the party. And I also encourage you to use the research that we've compiled in our compendium for your own campaigns. That is a Science for the People project. The data are not copyright. It's all peer reviewed, but it's just out there in the public sphere for you to use. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Sandra. A great resource. And John put a link directly to the most recent fracking compendium in the chat if you want to look at that more. Alrighty. Well, great. We will go to our next speaker. Breon Robinson is an organizer with Healthy Gulf based in Louisiana, working there in Louisiana and in Texas. Take it away, Breon.
Hey, you guys. Happy afternoon, happy morning, happy evening, happy Wednesday, whatever it is to those that are watching. I'm happy to be here. Just kind of giving like a background of how it is affecting us in the Gulf and also how it is affecting and kind of like contributes and correlates with the effects that is going on in Europe. Growing up here in southern Louisiana all my life, we're deemed Hurricane Allie, so we're used to seeing the threat of hurricanes every year, and we're used to being prepared for these things. But now that we are facing them at a bigger rate, and not just hurricanes, but other natural disasters, it starts to look into play. What is the cause of those things? And a lot of those things are the causes from these LNG export terminals, these methane gas export terminals that are surrounding us here, especially in Southwest Louisiana. Right now, there are over 20 methane export terminals in the Gulf region that had either been approved, under construction, in review, or even actively operating. 7 of those projects, 2 of which are currently operating, surround me from left to right here in Lake Charles. So these are things that I've seen growing up, that I've been born into, and that are still trying to, get their way in here in our community. These terminals, they create problems, not just for the air and for the water, but for public health. You have people who are dealing with issues of cancer, different respiratory diseases, different heart diseases. You have children that are also dealing with these uncommon cancers and uncommon diseases that are very insignificantly not supposed to happen to children at their ages. As much as PR and lobbyists advocate for these facilities, especially here in Louisiana, they enjoy telling us that they are good neighbors, or that these facilities that are looking to come here are good neighbors. All in all, we're not tricked by their hollow words, but instead we listen to community members like myself, community members like Roishetta, community members like the ones that I'll be mentioning, who live, in these communities and see firsthand the effects. We have residents like Mr. John Allaire, who lives in Cameron Parish, who is only a few miles from the Venture Global facility export terminal. He wakes up and he goes to sleep to flaring and so many different sounds. You have residents and advocates like Ms. Deborah Ramirez, who has been advocating for the end to this since the 1980s. She's watched her home, Mossville, Louisiana, be stripped away from her, and she's watched countless family members and friends die because of these export terminals and of of these facilities taking over in Southwest Louisiana. I've heard stories of even in Texas from Mr. Manning Rollerson with Better Brazaria, and how children are being born with cancer, at uncommon rates. So it's very crazy how a lot of this is happening. And although this this pause is great, we need to see more action and more work happen to not only save, the environment, but also save the lives of these people who are living in these communities. While there's many of things I can speak on about what's happening in the Gulf Coast and just throughout the United States, this is a global issue. You're hearing things from people in Ireland, from people in Germany. We all have allies across the world who are also dealing with these same issues. And for us to come united and for us to come together, this shows that we are very serious about what we're looking to achieve. So thank you for having me on this panel.
Thanks, Breon. Yeah, really, really critical to share and hear from folks who are living with the impacts of like Roishetta mentioned, the facilities that are already in place and not affected by the pause, and to keep fighting to end LNG for good. Okay, next up we will hear from Andy Gheorghiu. Andy is a climate campaigner based in Germany, who's been working for years, just like everyone else on the call, to stop fracking and fossil fuel infrastructure in Europe. So Andy, take it away.
Howdy, y'all, as I've learned recently. Thanks, Emil, for having me here. I have some internet issues, so I'm going to keep my video off, and I hope that I could at least share some slides. Oh, there you go. Fantastic. So it's very important to know that even before the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, LNG import terminals have been an issue in Germany. Back then, we've talked about 3 on terminals, and we already had a geopolitical dimension, including the transatlantic connection, because the Trump administration was putting pressure on Europe and especially Germany to actually build import terminals in order to get more US frack gas to Europe and Germany. And Germany was actually inclined to pay for 2 import terminals onshore, but only in exchange for the lifting of sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The landscape has changed dramatically. After the invasion of the war, the German government is pushing heavily for up to at least 9 LNG import terminals. Frida already touched upon the point that 3 of them, floating storage units, are already partially operational. The whole permitting procedure has been done without any environmental impact assessment and with barely any public participation, which is really worrisome from a democratic point of view. And in addition to the 3 already operational FSRUs, the German government has leased 3 additional ones. So all 6 FSRUs are leased by the German government, paid by the German taxpayers. And then, as I've already mentioned, the plans for the 3 LNG onshore terminals are still on the table. What's really striking is that this geopolitical dimension and the connection to the United States not only remained, but actually became stronger. We see that with regard to the spot market deliveries that are already reaching Germany, 80% of them are coming from the United States, mainly from the Gulf Coast. And on top of that, we have long-term contracts that have been signed between German energy companies and US LNG export companies. There are 2 major contractors. One of them is Venture Global, and the largest amount of LNG for CP2, for example, is destined for Germany, and the other one is Sempra Infrastructure, related to the Port Arthur LNG export terminal. But it's not only the long-term contracts and the spot market deliveries that are creating this transatlantic bridge to hell. It's also German banks who are actually co-financing US LNG export infrastructure, which is also worrisome because some of them are actually either owned by the German government or owned by federal states within Germany. Which means to kind of summarize that whatever happens in the relationship between the United States and Germany in terms of LNG has to do with the direct political will of the German government, where we currently have the Greens also forming the government, which is another layer of worries that we have to deal with. Next slide, please. Is that, yeah, okay. And the most important thing and the most successful thing that we did with the transatlantic coordination is actually to map exactly the export and the import sides, which means that we are now capable of saying this is no longer abstract. This is the export terminal in the US. These are the impacted communities in the US. This is what it does to biodiversity on site. And only through bringing the narrative of impacted communities and bringing the people also in person to Europe and confronting our political decision makers with the reality, we've been capable of actually slowly, convincing people that we have a massive problem that is, coming from a global warming perspective that is problematic, but also coming from a very important structural human rights risks dimension that is related to this whole connection. Next slide, please. And only because of the very good documentation and only because of our strong connection also on a personal level with the impacted communities in the United States, we've been able to provide the evidence that was needed in order to list LNG as a commodity with potential human rights risks in Germany. So we have an official report that lists LNG as a commodity with potential human rights risks, which now means that German energy companies have to address these issues. And this is because of the Due Diligence Supply Chain Act that has been already implemented in Germany. And we've already started to have dialogues and to confront German energy industry companies with the impacts that they are creating and with the suffering that we in Europe, in particular in Germany, are importing. Last slide, please. So we have opposition at all import sites in Germany, and meanwhile we have very good connection between all the German groups, but we're also slowly but surely connect them also on an individual level with the, and I repeat myself here, with the impacted communities in the United States, because, I mean, let's face it, we are dealing with an extreme inhumane industry here. And the only thing that has the power to actually win over this monster, and Roishetta already touched upon that, is humanity. And it's only by fostering our personal relationships on both sides of the Atlantic, only by closing the knowledge that we actually develop the strong movement that would eventually get rid of this industry. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy. Couldn't have said it better myself about what it's going to take to win. Speaking of winning, our last couple of speakers are going to talk about an important victory in Ireland that's been referenced. Just a reminder again, if anyone has questions for the panelists, we've answered a couple kind of technical ones, but use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll have probably time for a few questions at the end before we wrap up. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Julia Walsh, Director of Frack Action, and Johnny McElligott from Safety Before LNG. Go ahead, Julia.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My group, Frack Action, worked with Johnny's group, Safety Before LNG, and many others on a transatlantic campaign to stop New Fortress Energy's proposed frack gas LNG import terminal in the Shannon River estuary in Ireland. I'll give some of the history, and Johnny's going to give an update about where we are now. As a brief bit of background, Frack Action was one of the groups that led the movement to ban fracking in New York, along with Food and Water Watch and many others. After we won the ban on fracking in New York in 2014, we worked with Irish groups, many here today, to help them win their ban on fracking in Ireland, which they achieved in 2017. After that, the threat of a new frack gas LNG import terminal came about, and we worked together to stop that. The first thing we did as a transatlantic campaign was to turn this local fight into a national issue, given its international implications. We generated a lot of press making the case that since Ireland's fracking ban law was based on the environmental and public health impacts, importing frack gas was both hypocritical and was impacting the human rights in the US, plus damaging our climate. For several years, we worked together to build support throughout Ireland. Impacted residents from Pennsylvania traveled to Ireland multiple times, and we highlighted the stories of frontline communities in the US who are suffering from fracking, as well as all the science and health studies. And we had a little help from our big green friend, Mark Ruffalo, and many other artists who are amplifying these issues on social media and in the press. In 2020, a new coalition government was formed in Ireland with the Green Party. And thanks to the relentless work of our collective movement, one of the government policies was to halt all new LNG infrastructure and stop the import of frack gas. Because of this government policy, the application for the import terminal by New Fortress Energy was denied by the Irish Permitting Agency in September. Woohoo! Many of you, I'm sure, heard about that. This is a big victory, especially given the war in Ukraine and how other countries in Europe were ramping up their LNG imports. As Mark Ruffalo said, it's really a testament to our movement's strength when we have these collective wins. And while there's still more work to do, the company is now appealing the decision to reject the permit, and the Irish government has an alarming new policy to propose a state-sponsored LNG import terminal for emergency use. We are all going to continue working together to make sure that Ireland remains LNG free. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Johnny McElligott from Safety Before LNG. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak. Yes, as Julia said, it was a great victory. And as Andy said, what he really highlighted, the reason for our victory was that there was an empathy in Ireland towards the impacted communities that were being fracked elsewhere. And I can't highlight that enough, that we would never have won this campaign if it hadn't been for the scientific evidence and the human evidence that fracking destroys communities, lives, health, everything. And when we banned fracking in Ireland in 2017, we had learned for what had happened to, especially in Pennsylvania and in the fracked communities there. And that helped us ban fracking. And then we had the world's historic world's first ban on the importation of frack gas, because we looked at the full life cycle impacts. We weren't just looking at the difference when you burn gas locally, it has less of a climate impact than when you burn coal. But as Robert Howard, who addressed one of the parliamentary committees in Ireland a few years ago, he pointed out that the importation of frack gas was having a 44% higher carbon equivalent footprint than importing coal from Colombia to the power stations here over a 20-year period. And that really hit home to people that it's only when you look at the full life cycle impacts, both from a climate perspective, an energy perspective, a human rights perspective, a health perspective, that it made no sense. So we banned the importation of frack gas, and that was a great achievement. But now, as it happens, is that believe it or not, we have a Green Minister for Energy in Ireland, and he's now come up with this idea that, okay, we stop Shannon LNG and New Fortress Energy, but now we want to bring in maybe the idea of building an LNG terminal that we would never use. We just use it as a backup facility, and that it would be just used in case one of the interconnectors got blown up by the Russians or something. But since that it was an energy security reason, he's now saying that, oh, if we lose our interconnectors to Scotland and the North Sea gas, that if they blow up, then we would need an LNG terminal. So you could just see the power and the ability of LNG companies and the LNG industry and the fracking industry to undermine the democratic work of government. Now we've started, we have to start now and tell Minister Ryan, the Irish Green Minister, that we don't agree with any kind of LNG terminal in Ireland, because he actually said a couple of months ago when he came up with this great idea, we won't build a privately owned one, but we'll build one that we can commission out to a private company to bring in gas that we would never use. And he said that he had flagged it with environmental NGOs and nobody had a problem with it, even though we had 200 NGOs had written to him saying we had a problem with commercial LNG. So they've reinvented a new word now of a non-commercial, strategic, state-led, backup, temporary LNG terminal. So, I mean, you guys have been fighting LNG and the fracking industry in many different aspects, and you can see that they have a way to trying to play with words to get in there. So we would just, I'm going to put the link into the chat, and hopefully we can start another sign on. Again, I'm sorry, but just to let him know that the environmental and the grassroots groups especially don't want Ireland to be an overseas market for US frack gas, which is basically what it is. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julia and Johnny. It's an inspiring win in Ireland, but like almost all of our victories, needs to be defended and built upon, and that's why we're all here today. Thank you both again for all your great work and for sharing it with us. Alrighty, well, last but certainly not least, my friend Allie from Oil Change International is going to share some actions we can all take. And in case she doesn't get to it herself, Allie was involved in leading the fight to stop one of the LNG terminals on the west coast of the US a few years ago. So remember that we have won and we will continue to win if we work together. Thanks, Allie.
Thanks, Thomas. You stole the words right out of my mouth. But hi, everybody. I'm Allie Rosebluth. First of all, thank you, everyone who's here, who's spent their time today listening to these incredible speakers. Like Thomas said, I've seen LNG projects here in the United States stopped. We've heard about victories in Ireland, and we are going to get more victories. We're going to stop more LNG projects from harming our communities and our climate. And in order to do that, we need to increase our collaboration across the Atlantic. We need to be in solidarity together, and we need to work together. So this webinar is the first of a series of efforts to bring together US and European groups to push on our common agenda to move off gas. So, we heard about this recent decision from the Biden administration, from Roishetta and others, which is a very exciting first step towards what we need to do to stop this massive growth of LNG exports in the United States, which is having a huge impact in the EU as well. We need to celebrate this positive step, but we also need to make sure that the administration is hearing from organizations in the United States and Europe and across the world that this recent LNG decision has to be defended, and that it is the first of many actions that the administration needs to take to fight for our livable future. And so we've already seen Congress's efforts to overturn Biden's LNG pause. This measure has already passed in the House. So it's even more important that our senators, our congressmen are hearing from constituents that we support the LNG pause, and we want it to be expanded. We have to work together to defend this step, because it's a critical first step in the direction that we need to go. So right now we are asking people here to help generate calls to Majority Leader Schumer and their individual senators with a very clear message: support the LNG export approval pause and oppose any efforts to overturn it. And we have a number here that will be shared in the chat, 917-791-2257, where you can make those calls today. The next thing that we need to do to work together is by circulating this letter that we've been working on that is going to go to President Biden from groups in the United States, Europe, and across the globe, which is calling him to reject additional LNG-related infrastructure permits and make this export pause permanent. Of course, we are also thanking him for this step and ensuring that it is defended as much as possible. So if you have not signed, your organization has not signed this letter yet, please do. We have a goal of getting about over 500 organizations on this letter. We are close to doing it. So please consider signing it on. If you have already signed on or you're expecting to sign on, we also ask folks to please share with their networks. We want to reach as many organizations as possible so that the administration understands how vast this opposition to LNG is, and that his decision to pause export approvals is supported and must be defended, and that he needs to go even further to stop LNG for good. So thank you all so much. I'm going to pass it back to Thomas for our Q&A.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And again, Mark put those couple things in the chat. Number to call the Senate if you're in the US, and then the global sign-on letter to President Biden. If your organization hasn't signed it yet, please do so, and share with your networks, like Allie said. We are coming up to the top of the hour, and we had a couple questions that we could answer in the chat. One I saw a couple times is, will there be a recording? Folks wanted to share this with their colleagues or their members. So we will share a recording probably later today. We'll just email it to everybody who RSVP'd, so look out for that. I don't think we have time for other questions, but Roishetta, if you're available, I know you've had probably a real whirlwind last couple months, perhaps more than anyone else on the call. And I wondered if you might leave us with some words of wisdom or encouragement before we hop off the call.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for that opportunity. Again, I want to reiterate that no one person got to the pause announcement alone. It took all of us coming together. Many of us traveled back and forth across the waters, meeting with communities in Europe and in Asia. And many of those community members and frontline leaders came over to our communities and took tours. We went to DC. We met with FERC. We brought FERC to our communities. We brought the Department of Energy to our communities. We sat down. We made our demands. We were determined to have our demands met, and we still have a long way to go. We will continue until there is a ban on all exports. Thank you all to everyone who has fought so hard, all of our allies. We will continue to fight. We are available if you want to come to our communities and see what it's like living with these facilities. We are available if you want to have a conversation with us and understand why we are fighting so hard. We continue to welcome you to join in this fight. If you've been wondering how you can help, how you can use your voice, some folks have been creative enough to make puppets of myself and James. People have made art, music, poetry, shared our stories, followed us on social media. There are all kinds of ways that you can support. If you need answers, please reach out. We're easy to find on all social media sites. And I just want to encourage you to find the joy. Find the thing that you love about your community, the thing that you love about your environment, the thing that you love about the climate, and that is what you fight for. That is what will give you hope, and that is what will help you to keep going. Thank you all again. You all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Roishetta, and thank you to all our panelists and you all for joining. If you wanna say anything or sign off in the chat, we reopened the chat. But thank you again, everyone, for joining, and look out for the recording and the calls to action. And let's keep up the fight. All righty, have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.